Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Winning with CBRS, the new competitive edge for real estate. I'm here today with Chris Wixom and John Gilbert. John is from Rudin Management. Chris Wixom is from JMA. And I think you will find this webinar quite interesting. We have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to cover the CBRS topic thoroughly. Next slide, please, Pete. Just some housekeeping notes before we start. We will do whatever we can to answer questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please do it through the GoToWebinar platform. You're welcome to put those in, and they will be relayed to me. If not, we will answer as many of the questions during the presentation. If not, we will take your questions afterwards. Excuse me, we are recording this today, and we will publish a link to this within a few days, hopefully within 1 or 2. So you'll be able to listen to this after the event again, and we will publish it on YouTube, and we will send everyone a link. Today's slides will be emailed to everyone after the event is over. And if you'd like more information about this topic, please go to Connected RE/MAG or jmawireless.com, and there will be an awful lot of CBRS information for you to get. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chris Wixom from JMA, who's going to cover the topic of CBRS, what is it and how it works first before we begin the conversation with John. So Chris, yours, next slide.
Thanks very much. So first of all, I'm the Vice President of Enterprise Sales for JMA, and I lead the enterprise business over here. And I'll just say it's a very exciting time, not just for JMA, but I think our industry as a whole. There's quite a bit of change happening with the advent of 5G and also CBRS, which we are going to talk about today, and the new business models that are being created as part of it. JMA is in a very unique position right now. We're driving significant amount of growth and taking share, I think primarily because of a combination of factors, right? We are a US-based company with extensive experience, over 3,000 deployments that we've done, and we're driving best-in-class performance. And I do believe that success breeds success. And one of the reasons why we're growing so significantly is because of the success of our past deployments. And so we're just in a very fortunate position right now, right, where we can make significant investments in our technology platform, building industry leading capabilities in CBRS that we're going to talk about today, but then also 5G and 5G millimeter wave. And so just a very exciting time for us. So next slide. So I will say that for those of you that know CBRS, please hang tight. We're going to get into a much deeper conversation. For those of you that don't understand CBRS, we're going to spend this time, probably about 8 minutes or so, just giving the basics on how CBRS works. So Pete, next slide. So the first thing is on the spectrum landscape, right? The spectrum landscape is changing. So the current licensed spectrum is about 650 megahertz of spectrum. That's all the billions of dollars that the carriers have spent. They've got about 650 megahertz. And we are using more and more bandwidth as we move forward with different applications and things that we're using wireless today for. And for that reason, we are very capacity constrained. And so the US government is focusing in on adding spectrum, but then also new technologies like 5G to address that. The first, which we're going to focus in on today, is CBRS, which is in the mid-band. It's 150 megahertz of spectrum. In that mid-band, it's really just the first of other things that are happening as well. The C-band, which is about 280 megahertz, is also coming out towards the beginning of next year. And then we're not going to focus on today, but you also have millimeter wave in the high band from around 28 gigahertz to 39 gigahertz. So Pete, next slide. So what is CBRS and how does it work? It provides connectivity for enterprise applications. By definition, it works on a private core network. It is not, you're not connecting to the carrier core network. It's 150 megahertz in the 3.5 gigahertz range. And that's quite a bit of spectrum, right? Compare that to the graphic on the right. Verizon's at about 114 megahertz. And then you've got the Wi-Fi in about 83 megahertz of bandwidth. So 150 megahertz is quite a bit of bandwidth. It provides about 2.4 gigabits per second of secure capacity if you're using all 150 megahertz. You divide that into 10 megahertz channels, it's about 160 megabits per second. So quite a bit of capacity. Right now, we're doing mostly 4G solutions, but it is upgradable to 5G. So as you get excited about 5G and making buildings 5G enabled, this is a big part of doing that with the CBRS spectrum. Next slide. With CBRS, it is 3 tiers of priority. So the first tier is incumbents, the second tier is prioritized users or the PAL users, and then you have GAA. The incumbents, you're really not going to get interference mostly from the incumbents. It's fixed satellite, Navy, and radar. The Navy uses it mostly for flight operations, so you're really not going to get much interference from the incumbents unless maybe you're on the coast in a special area. The prioritized users, these are the PAL winners of the auctions. The auction just happened. They bid over $4.5 billion on prioritized access. It's important to note that the PAL winners are on a county-wide basis, and it's only 70 megahertz of the 150 megahertz of available spectrum. And so no matter what, you have 80 megahertz of free access to capacity as a GAA user. And you're going to use, these are IoT devices, smartphones, gateways, and the like. Pete, next slide. Okay, so what does a private CBRS network look like and how does it work? Let's focus on the right to begin with. There are really 4 components that I wanted to talk about. The picture here is for an indoor situation, but you might have a campus situation, you might have a downtown city center, smart cities, and those types of things, and also everything from utilities to railroad lines as well. But today we're going to focus in building and the 4 components on the right. You have your core network, which is your EPC core. Again, this is something a building owner will actually own and manage or have a third party manage for them. By definition, this is a private network where you're not going back to a carrier core. So you have your own core network. In addition, in the head end, you have a base station. I always like to define this or talk about it as a router of the cellular world. This is your signal source. Our signal source, as an example, is called XRAN. It's a virtualized base station. You can cover tens of thousands of active components or users from this one server. It's very flexible in the fact that you can start with one sector and go to as many as maybe 20 sectors all in this one single sector. That is attached fiber up the riser to amplifiers or radio nodes. Basically what that does is re-amplify the 3.5 gigahertz signal going through antennas out to end user devices. Those end user devices can be everything from smartphones, tablets, IoT devices, and also gateways. What the gateways do is, let's say I have something that doesn't have a 3.5 chip in it. It won't be able to connect to the CBRS network. A gateway has a 3.5 chip in it and allows it to convert so that any IP-related device, whether that be a security camera or a digital signage or what have you, can all connect into the network. Down at the bottom, I'm connecting into the internet from the head end, and there's something called the SAS or the SAS. The SAS, there are many providers out there. We work primarily with Google and Federated. And what they do is, if for whatever reason there is a PAL auction winner operating near your building, it will kick you off of that frequency. Again, that's if you're in the 70 megahertz that the PAL winners have. You always have access to the 80 megahertz and maybe more if you don't have somebody operating in that band. All right. So with that, John, I tend to think that CBRS is really, really important. I think you had mentioned that it was an incredible gift that the US government gave the commercial real estate industry of this free spectrum that you can use. Can you share a little bit about your views and your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was the first time that the FCC ever gave the real estate industry anything. What we're looking at here, and so you got to ask the question why, right? And what's interesting when you really dig down into this, and you touched on it a bit, Chris, is that what the FCC was looking at was, okay, how the heck do we accelerate this deployment of 5G networks? And what they said was, well, why don't we give property owners, in effect, a virtual license for the spectrum, for this 150 megahertz of spectrum within their properties, within the four walls and the roof of their buildings. And they said, okay, we'll do this to property owners, and property owners will then reach out to either the carriers directly or to a third-party manager, or do it themselves to create this private LTE network on a broadband basis. And to me, I think it's a brilliant strategy. B, sadly, it happened right before COVID hit, so I don't think a lot of people really understand it and know about it, and it kind of muffled the messaging of what the FCC did. But to me, it's a huge opportunity for property owners to ultimately see or take advantage of the Federal Communications Commission action, and be the first ones on their block to deploy broadband wireless networks, whether it's for IoT strategies, whether it's for tenant retention. What's amazing, and let's just talk about that 70 megahertz that's left over. You can take, the 7 largest tenants, or let's keep 10 megahertz for yourself, and then segment out the other 60 megahertz that's left, and give each of your tenants the opportunity to create their own private LTE networks, which is unheard of ever in terms of this intersection of telecommunications and real estate.
And can you talk a little bit about Rudin Management and your background and your position within Rudin, and how you guys are leveraging CBRS?
Sure. So I've been the chief operating officer at Rudin since 1993. So I've been doing this for a while. We got into smart building technologies in 1995, where we had a vacant building at 55 Broad Street, and we were one of the first owners to actually deliver optical fiber directly to the desktop. That was a piece of glass. What's interesting about CBRS is I can do the same thing now, but without a piece of glass or a wire connecting it. I can go directly to device from that SAS and that EPC core network, and deliver bandwidth at huge, and very fast bit rates. So what does that mean for us as a property owner? Number one, as COVID has taught us, our lobbies, once people begin in en masse to return to the office, our lobbies are going to take on a totally different role than they've ever been before. We will be queuing up because we need to restrict the number of people on elevators. People will be no longer a pass-through to get to the elevator, but more and more people will be in our lobbies. So the ability to push as much bandwidth as I possibly can into that space is hugely important. As we look at IoT strategies and what we've seen in terms of our prescriptive data and the product Nantum, as buildings have never had a brain. Now they have a brain with Nantum. What CBRS enables us to do is to create a very granular central nervous system on a wireless basis. So we can go into tenant spaces, extract data, give that data back to our tenants very efficiently. And this is hugely important, as what we know for a fact is that the more granular data that I can collect within my office buildings, the more valuable it is, and the more valuable it is to my customers from a space utilization standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, from an energy consumption standpoint. The ability to push and pull those data streams on a floor by floor basis, on a quadrant of a floor by a quadrant of a floor basis, is hugely valuable. So we see this from a real estate standpoint as, as close to the holy grail as you can get, because it doesn't interfere with Wi-Fi. So I'm not pushing, my Wi-Fi radios into my tenant spaces and then have them complain, what the heck are you doing? This is at a totally different part of the spectrum that allows it to be interference free. The security aspects of CBRS are very unique, and I hope you talk a little bit more about that, because as all of us are concerned about cybersecurity, and as we deploy these wireless networks, I think CBRS brings something very, very unique to the table that other wireless protocols don't. And I think finally, when you really look at the future, our future, in terms of robotics, in terms of, if I have robotic cleaning, I'm going to need a network that those robotic, cleaning machines can talk to, be told what to do, where to go, follow ultimately where they're supposed to go. And that doesn't exist right now, but will once CBRS is deployed.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but what would you say to folks that are very familiar with Wi-Fi and are planning and saying that Wi-Fi 6 will solve my issues and I can do all of this with Wi-Fi? Why move to CBRS or do both?
I think what we've seen, and we have several of our buildings where we have, ubiquitous Wi-Fi, either in conference facilities or in the entire building. What we've seen is that the interference patterns of Wi-Fi, if my Wi-Fi network bumps up against another Wi-Fi network, I've got interference issues. I have not seen evidence that Wi-Fi 6 can solve that, since it's still in a public, Wi-Fi is unlicensed frequency. This CBRS, even though the owner has the license, is a licensed, if you will, frequency that will prevent interference from happening, just based upon the way the SAS and the EPC will work, and the ability to segment portions of this wireless spectrum so that interference, can be dealt with.
All right, let's, you talked about the lobby. I found it absolutely fascinating. One of the things you didn't talk about was the applications you're doing on the handsets. I absolutely love that. Can you talk about what a tenant will experience before they even get to the building?
Sure. So, when we began COVID, or when COVID began, we began coming up with our strategy. There were three main points that we wanted to cover. One is the health and safety of our employees and of our customers. Secondly, was we decided that what was important for us was to lead through communication. And the last piece was, how do we leverage the existing data that we're currently collecting? And so what we did was we've deployed an app through our buildings that tenants will be able to, once they get off the subway, literally see what the lobby condition is. Are there queues? Are there delays getting up in vertical transportation as we're limiting the number of people that can get in that elevator? They're able to see average data dealing with indoor air quality, temperature data, and humidity data, so that they're immediately seeing what the indoor air quality condition is of that building. And they're also able to get push notifications as well as to get into the building utilizing their phone with the QR code that they can have on that phone. So the phone becomes a very, very important sensor in and of itself, as well as a distributor of information. As all of us are constantly on our phones these days, we wanted to leverage the data that we're currently collecting to share it with our customers, so that they can have a better sense of comfort and safety, knowing what the actual conditions were, not only in that lobby, but in the rest of the building.
So John, sticking with the lobby for a second, I think it's so important to enhance the tenant experience, right? We want to get them back into the building. And so I love what you guys are doing with the lobby. I always also think about that kind of touchless experience. How do I make that a fast and touchless experience with, I think you're playing around with things like thermal imaging and other types of things, but also security, digital signage and other types of things to make that experience truly unique as you come in and go up the elevators.
Yeah, the physical security aspect of it, thanks for bringing that up, Chris, because the beauty of within that 10 megahertz spectrum that I've segmented for myself, let's just use that, I can push wireless video. So if there are spots on the building, if I have a historic building or I've got a bunch of marble where I can get power or even a battery to that camera, I can grab that content and push it back into the network, and ultimately to be able to see it, in my central command post where I'm looking at security data. So what this bandwidth allows us to do is things that we were never able to do before. So that's why I'm excited about it. And, I think more and more real estate folks are waking up and seeing, this citizens broadband radio spectrum is something that is very valuable. As you said, there was, I think you said $4.5 billion spent to buy the PAL licenses. Well, guess what, property owners? You got that for free.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's an unbelievable value add to real estate.
So I think when I'm talking to real estate owners and building management firms, one of the things that we get stuck on sometimes is the ROI. You mentioned some of the applications that commercial real estate owners can leverage, but how do you work through the ROI of I'm going to invest whatever in this infrastructure to drive the things you're talking about? How do you work through the ROI analysis and that end of it?
Well, I think, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? And the problem we're trying to solve is how do I attract and retain tenants? And now suddenly I've got a new big arrow in my quiver, and that being private LTE that ultimately can be, utilized to do just that, to attract my customers. That opportunity is absolutely huge. And it's figuring out those use cases that ultimately I'm going to use and make in order to create products off of this spectrum that'll be, valuable and interesting to my existing customers.
Yeah, and then I guess along those lines, one of the things you'd mentioned to me is you had worked really hard with Nantum and other things you guys are doing with HVAC and other types of trying to drive efficiencies in terms of energy use. But now you've got this gift of not being able to just see building level data, but data on a floor by floor basis. Can you comment a little bit about what that enables you to do? I think you touched a little bit on it with things like cleaning robots or automation on the robotics side, but can you comment on that a little bit?
Sure. We know for a fact that if I can get floor by floor data and I can provide that back to my customers, especially in buildings that have floor by floor DX units, air handlers on each floor where conditioned air is actually being created, I can save an enormous amount of money for my tenants as well as for myself. So we've got a very large tenant, 16 floors in one of our buildings. And we showed them what we can do on a building by building basis. They said, well, can you try this on a floor by floor? I said, yeah. Well, it was kind of complicated in terms of getting those sensors on a floor by floor basis. It's going to be much easier with CBRS. But what we found is that on top of the 40% savings that we were already able to achieve for that building at core, an additional 30% savings could be achieved from that individual tenant simply by, correlating occupancy data with fan speed on that DX unit, and not only fan speed, but fan ramp. You know, when does that thing turn on? So I'll give you the example. So I'm a tenant on the 14th floor, 40 East 52nd Street. I walk into the building. Those DX units are not turned on yet until I, as the first person who swiped through that turnstile, now it's turned on. So in normal situations, let's say that was at 9 o'clock in the morning. Our leases are saying that had to be happening at 7 a.m. So we've just saved 2 hours worth of conditioned air, electricity, steam, natural gas, whatever we're ultimately using to create that conditioned air. That's all saved. So across our portfolio, we've cut our electrical consumption by 41%, our carbon by 44%, and our steam by 48%, simply by correlating data sets that never talked to each other before. The more granular we can do that, the more money we can save, the more we can enhance the experience of our customers within our buildings.
Yeah, and I think this goes hand in hand, but it even gives you flexibility to do like a flexible workforce type of situation where you can move people around. So if you know people are on the east side of the building, you can direct people to the west side of the building to maintain distance and those types of things. Is that right? Did I capture that right?
Yeah, the space utilization aspect of this is huge. For instance, if I'm, you know, if it's morning and it's on a sunny day, sunny hot day, I should be pushing, you know, people to use conference rooms on the west side of the building, not on the east side of the building where that sun the solar, you know, piece is hitting it too hard. All those things are possible when I have that network that can ultimately help modify the behavior of the people on those floors.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. Let's go back to the security. You touched on it a little bit. I would say from my perspective, security is an incredibly important thing and something that CBRS adds quite a bit to the table on, because you are by definition, by moving over from a Wi-Fi network to putting these critical applications or devices on a CBRS network, it's a trusted environment. And so you don't have an IP address, it's not as hackable. And as you move from 4G to 5G, that security even becomes even more greatly enhanced. I think that's incredibly important. I've heard stories of buildings being hacked, and as you put more and more IoT sensors onto the network, I think this is a pretty critically important thing.
It's huge. It's everything. I mean, you know, somebody, you know, hacks into your BMS and starts messing with your chiller controls. Only bad things can happen. So enhanced wireless security as we expand these networks is a huge plus for CBRS.
Yeah, and let's go into Nantum a little bit, because I find this an incredibly fascinating platform, and it's not just for Rudin, right? You guys provide it as a service to other companies too.
Yes, we're in the largest bank in the world, largest REIT, largest state-owned utility is using the product. You know, I think beyond COVID, people are realizing that the data that buildings generate is hugely valuable, but it's raw data. It is crude oil, and unless you've got software systems like Nantum that can synthesize that crude oil and make that data useful, you just sit there with with unrefined oil that can't be used. So what Nantum does is it acts like a brain. It literally we use machine learning, we use artificial intelligence to memorize patterns within the building. Let's take water consumption, for example. We've had 3 different situations
Rich, can you hear John okay?
No, he's, it looks like it's on his end. But
John, we're losing you. So maybe I'll cut in just for a minute and talk a little bit
That
about,
building from even opening.
there we go. Hey, John, you're
So-
breaking up.
Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can, thanks.
See, that's why we need more bandwidth.
We did that on purpose.
yeah.
There you go.
Hey,
So
John,
we
So-
lost
Chris, can
the
I
last
jump in with a
30
question for John before we go on? John, so many of the other real estate companies invested a few dollars into the prop tech business and into companies like Nantum. Why did you choose to actually set up this business and be the company behind Nantum and do this yourself? Why not? Why didn't you just choose to do what other companies did and invest in it? You really have, sunk a lot of energy into this, and it's paid off. But why did you choose to do that?
Well, the way I viewed it is we had no choice. And the reason we had no choice was we had come up with this concept. And it was really as a result of Con Edison asking us to be the commercial office petri dish for something called the Smart Grid Demonstration Project back in 2009. And this was a big chunk of money that President Obama had put out as part of the stimulus package following the recession of '08. And the goal was to make the grid smarter. We all remember what happened in 2003 when 55 million people lost power from Montreal to New York and from Ohio to Maine, not because there was too little supply or too much demand, but because the grid saw something that it had never seen before, and it was binary and it shut down. So we walked into our first meeting and they had up on the screen, Rich, what was going on with the grid right before the lights went out on that fateful day in August '03. And they posed a very interesting question, which was as follows. We, Con Ed, had a 45-second early warning that something bad was going to happen. We want to give you, Rudin, and your friendly and unfriendly competitors at least 30 seconds of that early warning. Do you want it? We said, absolutely yes. We can program our elevators. You send us that signal. We'll put the elevators will take that signal, go to the nearest floor, open up. People will be on the wrong floor, but they won't be stuck in an elevator. And then the lights are going to go out. 2 thumbs up. We then walked out of that meeting and I said to Gene Bonneberger, who's my senior vice president for operations, I said, Gene, how the heck are we going to do that in 30 seconds? He says, I have no idea. We literally went around the corner. There's a little lousy pizzeria on 14th Street. And we started having this conversation. And I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I put it on the table, early iPhone model. And I said, Gene, that phone has an operating system. Why don't our buildings have an operating system? If it did, we could take that external data, we could mix it with our internal data and make it actionable within 30 seconds. He said, right answer, simple answer to a hard question. Let's go find those people who have already figured this out and built this, which we endeavored to do. We literally virtually and physically went around the world looking for this. What we came to the conclusion, nobody had thought of this before. Nobody had done this. And we said to ourselves, we have to build this. God bless the Rudins. They said, let's go. It makes sense. One condition, it better attract or retain customers, or I don't want anything to do with it. And clearly now the data that we're sharing with our customers has proven that if you can get your arms around the data, if you can synthesize the data to make it useful, it's hugely valuable. So we created the company, not something you're supposed to do at a guy my age, but we set out to do it. A lot of people said, why did you do this? I said, if I didn't, I'd hate myself for the rest of my life because I didn't take the shot. And so now we're out there pushing the envelope, and where it's taken us, Rich, is places I never expected it to take us, into energy procurement, into all these things that we're talking about in terms of CBRS, renewable energy, you need to understand your real-time demand, and you need real-time supply at source. And you then need to create a blockchain that will create an immutable ledger. So when the regulators come knocking on our door, we can say, yes, I bought it here at this solar farm or at this wind farm or at this small hydro dam. And this is where I used it in building X. This is when I used it, date stamped. Thank you very much. Let's go on to the next one.
Gotcha. So I see where CBRS makes such a big difference in your life now with Nantum. That makes perfect sense to me. Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's great question. So John, I find it fascinating because often people will come to me and they're not exactly sure how they're going to use or what application they're going to drive, but they want CBRS in the building primarily from a marketing standpoint, and they want to be able to say that they have the best broadband experience and they can offer 5G to their tenants. Is marketing, is that a big part of it too?
Sure. If you're going to expend the time and effort to put this in, you sure as heck should be talking about it, because it is a very, very valuable asset to you as property owner and to your customers and tenants.
So along those lines, I thought I would share, let's say you have decided to deploy a CBRS system. I thought I would share kind of 4 of my thoughts in terms of things that you should consider when you're deploying a CBRS network. And the first one is that whatever you put in, we are seeing a lot of change out in the industry. And so it should be flexible to evolve over time. One of the big evolutions that you're going to see is this is not only a 4G network, it's a 5G network. So whatever you deploy, make sure that it's easily upgraded from 4G to 5G. For us, it's a software upgrade, right? Because our virtualized base station or XRAN is a software solution. So it can easily be upgraded from 4G to 5G. The second thing is we've touched upon this a couple of times, but whatever you do, if you put in a system, don't limit yourself. It's 150 megahertz of bandwidth. Make sure you can use all of that 150 megahertz, or at least the 80 megahertz that is on the GAA and available. Many systems out there are Cat5, Cat6 based solutions that will limit you to 20 or 40 megahertz. And I personally would try and stay away from that so that you can leverage the full 150 megahertz. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, and John has touched upon this many times, you're going to want to be able to drive many different types of applications over the system. And so with a centralized intelligence, what you can do is you can take that 150 megahertz and divide it up into maybe 10 megahertz channels. By doing that, I can do the lobby applications that John was talking about, worry about the security, also maybe do some of the robotics with the robotic cleaning, but divvy that up over many channels. And with a centralized intelligence, I can do that. The other thing that centralized intelligence does is I may need just a little bit of capacity to begin with as I'm getting my toes wet. But then over time, I may want to have 10,000 devices attached to this network. And so the other suggestion I would make is have the flexibility to increase your capacity over time with different sectorization techniques and using more spectrum. And then the final thing is many of you own many different types of buildings. Many of you own campuses or will want to have a combination of the ability to support both indoor and outdoor areas around your building. Or maybe like Rudin, you've got many buildings in New York City and you want a centralized head end and be able to reach out to the buildings that you serve or that you own. And so that would be the other thing I would suggest is in terms of flexibility is have the ability to support both indoor and outdoor, have the ability from the centralized head end to go many miles, maybe 30 miles in any one direction so that you can support the different things that you need. And then finally, that whatever you put in has a flexibility to put out different power levels so that you may have floors that are small in terms of space, and you may have areas that are very large. So you want to have that flexibility to meet the different morphologies of different buildings. So John and Rich, those are my thoughts in terms of things to consider for buildings, but anything you would add or change to that?
Well, to me, it's the opportunity to use your imagination. If there are things that you wanted to do, but you couldn't because you didn't have the infrastructure to do it, now CBRS will help you, actualize all of those things that you wanted to do. I think it's also what I would do is the visionaries in talking about the opportunity that 5G brings, read that stuff, look at that stuff, because it's going to come, it can come to your building first, because you will have that 5G network, accelerated network, before others will. So I just think there's huge opportunity here, and I may be the only one saying it. I don't think I am. But I think if you look at what the industrial sector and the manufacturing sector are using this spectrum for, they're leading this, and they're leading it because it gives them a leg up in terms of what they do all day, every day, in terms of making things or moving things within a warehouse situation or in a manufacturing plant.
Yeah. So John, you've kind of led this with thought leadership, because you delved into this. You heard about this a year and a half, 2 years ago. You've delved into this. Really interesting question came from the field that I thought is perfectly timed here. How do property owners take advantage of CBRS if carriers have not allowed roaming between private networks and the macro network? How do you see carriers allowing roaming in the future, and what's the solution to that issue?
So I think that's a great question. So you'll notice that most of what we've focused on really doesn't require roaming. We've been talking about operational efficiencies and data and those types of things. We really haven't been talking about people's handsets and smartphones and CBRS enabling connectivity to those handsets. There are companies out there that are working with the carriers right now to solve the roaming. So number one, if you are corporate liable, or you have a corporate liable piece of equipment, and you have single tenants that own or that are operating in most of the building, you can do roaming today. So on a Apple iPhone and the latest Apple iPhone, they're dual SIM phones or virtual SIM phones. Those you can hand out to your employees and they can roam today. So one can be the private network and it's operating on the private network when you're in the building. When you're outside of the building, it's working on AT&T or Verizon or what have you. So that works today. What the many companies are working on right now is that if you have, or more in like an airport or something like that, and you have a random AT&T person coming into your building, that it will automatically roam onto that network. We'll see how that happens. What I've been told is, you're looking probably towards the end of this year to the middle to end of next year for those roaming agreements to be worked out. But John, are you hearing something similar?
Yeah, John, I know you've talked to the folks from Geoverse about something like this. Is that an alternative for the roaming part of this?
That's way above my pay grade in terms of roaming. I'm really focused on, as Chris said, the internal movement of data on this. I know they'll figure out the roaming stuff. That's not something that I'm concerned about. Again, this is new technology. The hardware manufacturers are just catching up. Sensor manufacturers. I think what people don't realize that in every new phone right now, there's a CBRS chip. So, this is gonna move more quickly than I think people realize, because from a hardware standpoint, they figured it out.
So this other question came in that sort of relates to that. So does this solution require you or your partner to onboard all tenant devices. I don't know what onboard quite means there, but does that mean that all tenant devices, if they want to work on this system, must be coordinated?
I'll give that one to Chris.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, right? It's a 3.5 network, and so if those devices have 3.5 chips in them, then they can connect to the network. If they don't, then you can put, as I was mentioning earlier, gateways in those areas so that any IP-related device or any device connecting in through Wi-Fi can do so. And what those gateways do is it converts it back to the 3.5 signal. I will say that you can, as a building owner, drive coordination on how the system works, right? Because if you don't have a 3.5 signal in the area that you don't want it to have, then you can't access the network. And so by definition, where you put these, what's pictured here, the radio nodes, the amplifiers, and the antennas, if you don't want building floor 3 to be covered, then you don't put an amplifier and antennas in there. So you can control and have a coordinated approach to the building depending on where you put the system.
You know what this tells me, these questions? It's very interesting. It tells me that people are thinking about this in strictly a cell phone sort of a realm, and they're not thinking about it in the same way you are, John, in terms of what I can do with my building and coordinating all the data in my building. People are still thinking about this as sort of the in-building solution, and that is something that's going to happen and will work. But I think you're at a different level, and I think that it's interesting, and I'm glad the audience has brought that up, because I don't think they're looking at it in as deep a level and as data-driven a level as you are, John. One last question that's here right now is, and I guess this is for you, John, is how can you speak specifically, how do you make the ROI work? It sounds like you've gone into that a little, not in the numbers, but in terms of what you're doing with it. But how do you look at this from an ROI standpoint?
You know, you've again, the first thing you've got to do is use your imagination from a use case standpoint and see ultimately what can be done here. And that's a long list. It really is. And then you ultimately look at that and say, okay, in some buildings that are fully leased, maybe I won't deploy CBRS unless I've got some tenants that are rolling very soon, and I want to show them what I can do for them. You know, I think the dollars that go into this, we've got to look at it no different than, okay, am I doing an elevator upgrade? Am I doing a a chiller upgrade? You understand what it's going to cost. You understand what the long-term value is, and you run your model and you run your math. So in terms of return on investment, there's different ways to look at it. You know, I think God bless the Rudins again, that they take a long-term view of this. I look at this as foundational infrastructure that at some point in the future, every building is going to need to have.
Hey, John, what do you say to building owners that say, oh, this sounds a little bit complicated. I don't have the expertise to manage this type of network. What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, go find a third party that's in the business that does this from a neutral host standpoint. There are companies that are being formed that are already formed that want to come in, understand the value of this, and see the opportunity here.
And from that standpoint, I would assume to many building owners to change what would be a CapEx expense to something that is more of a monthly, CapEx, one-time CapEx contribution to a monthly expense would be a value that you can push the costs out over time. Is that true?
Yeah, you can structure deals all sorts of different ways. Who puts first dollar in, who puts second dollar in, who gets first dollar out, who gets second dollar out. So there's many ways to structure this. I think what the industry really needs are use cases, or actual, this is the way it works, this is what's happening, This is what we're able to do with it. And, you know, this is how I'm getting my money back.
You know, what's funny is it seems like based on the questions here, there's a lot of people who feel like they need to protect Wi-Fi 6 or not have CBRS sort of malign the opportunity for Wi-Fi 6. And I think you answered this early on. Is there concern of Wi-Fi 6 taking some of the hype away from CBRS, even when the auction's bringing in record numbers? I see an agenda there, but I think I'd like to turn it over to you guys, but my opinion is that I don't think that that anything to do with Wi-Fi 6 is taken away from quote unquote the hype of CBRS, because I think the uses are quite different. You agree with that, John?
I do, and this isn't going to wipe out Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 will have its place in the sun and will perform and do great. You know, I just see this as a different wireless spectrum that if you want to do certain things, especially in the IoT space, this is the way to go. And it's a bigger pipe, it's more secure. So you put your more secure and mission critical data on this, and you know, have at it.
Yep. This one's for you, Chris. Can you have more than one antenna per radio node? If so, how are the antenna IDs handled with respect to the SAS?
So you certainly can. So each antenna can be what it's called its own CBSD. And so, and there's some debate around this, but you can create it, and we are having multiple antennas off of that amplifier, and you can identify, and what you have to do is be able to identify each antenna as its own CBSD.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and a little advertisement for JMA. I think, Chris, when we first spoke, is that a single radio can actually do both Wi-Fi as well as CBRS, so that you've got those dual antenna can be multi-frequency as well. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little bit different than that, but what we are getting a lot of requests for is to be able to support both commercial wireless and then also CBRS. On the commercial wireless side, that's the 600 megahertz to 2.5 gigahertz for the carriers, for AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. And so what we're able to do is not only support a CBRS solution, but let's say T-Mobile wanted to, let's say you're an enterprise commercial real estate owner, you put in the CBRS network, that enables somebody like T-Mobile to come in at very reduced costs and pay you for that right. And so we're able to do that to support T-Mobile should they want to come into the building as well and offer connectivity.
Gotcha. And so one last question, and I think we'll wrap up with this, John. The question came in about do you have DAS systems in your buildings? And if you do, it says, are your buildings equipped with DAS? If not, do they not have your CBRS SIM and will be out of coverage until they get to a Wi-Fi signal? Or do these is there a deal with the SIM provider? Does any DAS system you've got interfere or intermingle with CBRS as you go forward?
Not to my knowledge, no. You know,
they
different
don't.
frequency. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. That's really for you.
Yeah, they don't. It's different frequencies. So like the DAS systems that we have in Rudin buildings were actually put in by Verizon and Extenet, but I think it's mostly Verizon. Those all cover from 600 to 2.5 gigahertz. So that same system, you can interface in the 3.5 gigahertz amplifier, and then over the same antennas, assuming the antennas can cover the range, you can put out both the commercial network from 600 to 2.5, but then also CBRS, but they don't interfere with each other.
Yeah, and I guess the question was, and I'm a very, not to insert my opinion too much here, but I'm very down on Wi-Fi calling. It sounds like the person was saying, will they be out of coverage until they get to a Wi-Fi signal? so they can use Wi-Fi calling. But that seems like a solution that's not germane here. But that was the question that was asked, and I don't see that Wi-Fi has anything to do with it there. Chris, you agree?
I do agree. I mean, Wi-Fi calling was this big deal 6-7 years ago, and people were in our industry were concerned that it would affect, DAS and putting in wireless commercial systems, and it hasn't at all. I would say Wi-Fi calling has its place, but it really hasn't affected what we do.
Right, and I think that the last one is obvious. This since devices today are capable of using 3.5 spectrum, can businesses continue their bring your own device policy, or will new devices need to be purchased? Only the newest devices will have 3.5 in them. So you're going to have to go through a replacement cycle before you'd be able to make sure that everyone in your building had a 3.5 capable phone. Am I correct?
I think that's true. I mean, the 3.5 phones have been out for a while now. Your iPhones, your new iPhones all have it. Samsung, your Google phones all have them. And pretty much every new phone now has a 3.5 chip in them. So you will go through that cycle. I think John mentioned earlier, that cycle happens pretty quick, and it's already happening.
Gotcha. Well, gentlemen, I think we're out of time here. This was terrific. I appreciate this. John, I always respect your intellect and your humanity and appreciate you doing this with us. Chris, thank you so much for participating in this and sponsoring this today. I think we answered a tremendous amount of questions. And John, you and I have been working together a lot on promoting CBRS as a technology for, as a frequency band for commercial real estate folks to learn about. So I thank you very much for that. And that's something that we're going to continue with that effort, because I think it's something that's really important for commercial real estate people to know about. And Chris, thank you for everything. Really appreciate your help and your excellent job today in putting this together. Gentlemen,
thank you, much appreciated.
Thanks, you
guys. Be well.
Be well, you too. We'll talk soon. Okay, guys.